Kyiv has no interceptors left to defend the city.
And with that in mind, has this then been a very visceral example of Europe letting Ukraine down?
Absolutely. And I think obviously not just Europe, also the Americans, because they started this war in Iran. They burnt through huge stocks of these Patriot interceptors, fighting a war that they ultimately seem to have lost. And yes, it's left Ukraine largely undefended against this threat, which is the Russians are, taking every advantage in this regard, because they know that we don't really have any of these interceptors, so they're using as many ballistic missiles as they can, whilst they have the opportunity to do so.
NATO's General Secretary Mark Rutte has promised to cut any red tape standing in the way of European nations sending missile interceptors to Ukraine. This week, the capital, Kyiv's been unable to defend itself against heavy Russian artillery, with drones and ballistic missiles breaking through and killing dozens of people. Jimmy Rushton is special correspondent for the Kyiv Independent. Morning, Jimmy.
Good morning.
Is it clear what red tape is currently standing in the way?
No, and to be honest with you, it's not really red tape or government bureaucracy that has stood in the way in the past. It's just been the fact that there have been a physical lack of these air defence interceptors, particularly PAC-3 and air defence interceptors for the Patriot missile system, which is the only system Ukraine has which is capable of shooting down ballistic missiles.
How damaging a week has this been?
I mean, it's been tough. I think what you've seen is several Russian strikes against logistics warehouses, civilian logistics warehouses in Kyiv, partly framed as a response for Ukraine's strike on the Wildberries Russian logistics centres, which were supplying a lot of military material to the front. But it's not going to stop Ukraine's war effort. It's not going to make the Ukrainian people want to, pressure the government into ending the war. So I think it's been damaging, obviously, but it's just one series of strikes in many strikes over this 4.5-year period.
Yeah. Was it clear and was it public that stocks of interceptors were running low?
Yes, because when there's a ballistic missile attack on Kyiv and you don't see the very familiar sight of the Patriot interceptors shooting up into the sky, you know that they don't have any, that they've run out. So, and the Russians are very, very aware of this as well. So it's very clear when, unfortunately, Kyiv has no interceptors left to defend the city.
And with that in mind, has this then been a very visceral example of Europe letting Ukraine down?
Absolutely. And I think obviously not just Europe, also the Americans, because they started this war in Iran. They burnt through huge stocks of these Patriot interceptors, fighting a war that they ultimately seem to have lost. And yes, it's left Ukraine largely undefended against this threat, which is the Russians are, taking every advantage in this regard, because they know that we don't really have any of these interceptors, so they're using as many ballistic missiles as they can, whilst they have the opportunity to do so.
How quickly can interceptors be shipped to Ukraine?
I mean, it's a political decision. If it was made, they could be here within 24 hours. They're generally shipped via air to Zhizhov and then trucked across the border. There are stocks of these interceptors in the arsenals of many Western partners, but there aren't that many. And again, it's a political decision. Do you keep them at home to defend against a potential, attack against yourselves, or do you allow them to be sent to Ukraine? And I think obviously Ukrainians would like the latter decision, but it is a very difficult decision. They are very expensive and they are in short supply at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Jimmy, thanks very much for joining us. It's good to speak to you. That's Jimmy Rushton, special correspondent at the Kyiv Independent, talking about Europe letting Ukraine down. And actually, on that, Serhiy Beskryntrov, an advisor to Ukraine's president on the development of defence technology, is quoted as saying the war of attrition has entered its next phase. He estimates that Russia is capable of launching 100 ballistic missiles every month to attack targets such as logistic hubs, industrial facilities, wood stores and warehouses. It certainly is a war of attrition, and this next phase needs proper support from the US and Europe in order for Ukraine to see it through. That's Jimmy Rushton from the Kyiv Independent.
The US president has denied reports that the US is suffering a munitions shortage, going as far as promising to pursue jail sentences for those suspected of leaking information. This comes after a report that said Trump had raged at Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth last week over a shortage of American missiles, which ultimately forced him to cancel planned strikes on Iran. Let's speak to Caitlin Doornbos, White House correspondent at The Washington Post. Hello to you, Caitlin.
Hi there.
Is there really a munition shortage?
Yes, there is. There are some hundreds of these really critical defense missiles that we still need, built up in our stockpiles. However, I think what the really critical part here is that number, that figure, that reporting has been leaked, and it seems as if it's been done intentionally to try to force the president's hand here.
Force him to do what?
Force him to abandon the war effort, to force him to withdraw entirely, because there are come at a time when we were looking at another ramp up into possible more strikes. I know it feels like clockwork whenever Donald Trump says that we're going to be launching a new round of strikes on Iran, but it was suspicious timing for me. And I'm a journalist, so I'm very pro sharing information that is very necessary. But this type of information that is shared is the type of information that can get our troops killed. And so yeah, it had a really, I think the president is right to be concerned about this particular leak.
Have we any idea, not names obviously, but any idea what's the group of people that would be able to leak this kind of information?
Well, somebody with access to the highest levels of classified information. We don't talk about how many missiles we have left to defend our troops. Our troops' safety is the number one important thing. And for that information to be leaked, you're looking at somebody who has the highest level of access, or at least somebody within the military establishment or within the administration itself.
Why would America have a shortage of munitions?
There is rightly cited a lot of the munitions that we had given to Ukraine, but what I don't think is enough pounded on is just how much we've had to expend this cycle of this war. Yes, we, as well as much of the world, gave our Patriot missiles and batteries to Ukraine, but also we expended a lot of them in defending our troops in the Middle East and in the region during these past 5 months of the war. And with that happening, you're left with a dwindling number there. And I think the Iranians are really trying to see if they can push the United States to the limit and see how long the United States can last in that region. And by showing your hand and saying, well, this is how many missiles we have left, that is going to force some change or some shifting decision makings for sure.
How quickly can they be replaced?
They can't be replaced quickly. Now, one of the things that we've been watching pretty closely has been Donald Trump's initial mention that he may be giving the license to produce Patriot missiles to Ukraine for them to be able to produce those themselves. And the big question there is like, well, how soon can Ukraine get on to start producing these types of missiles for themselves? And the estimates are anywhere from 3 to 6 months to years. So these are not quickly available to be manufactured. They're not simple systems. And unfortunately, we had spent a lot of our really smart intelligence weapons like the Patriots battling lower cost things like drones. And we wasted a lot of them, frankly.
What about Pete Hegseth in all of this? There was a report that, Donald Trump was furious with Pete Hegseth last week because of this shortage of American missiles. Number one, is it his fault? And secondly, what do you think the outcome of that might be?
Well, it's hard to say that it's his fault. I can armchair quarterback what the defense chief should have done with this war. But I don't know. The White House has, of course, denied that report, but it seems to be within Donald Trump's character to be really upset by this, because he had gone out on record and said that, I'm threatening, decapitation strikes, essentially. And then he's left flat-footed when the New York Times gets this information about a dwindling number of stockpile munitions. And, I think it would be really strange if the president did not know how limited we were. I think it's probably more likely that he was worried about the leak itself.
What do you think the impact then is of, or the effect is of, not having enough munitions and having to cancel planned strikes on Iran? What's the impact on Iran, and what is the impact on the American electorate?
Well, for Iran, it's woohoo. It's one step closer to the U.S. hopefully giving up in their minds. For the American voter, it's more reason to end the war. It's a bit concern, but I don't know. Every time I speak to Times Radio too, it's hard to describe the American appetite for what it is overseas. We are so detached from the other side of the world that I think people are just ready to get their gas prices down than they are worried about our troops, as they rightly should be.
Clearly, I think I'm right in saying, am I not, that kind of continued involvement in a war against Iran is incredibly unpopular in America?
Yes, and certainly it is. I think I was just pointing out there that the concerns seem to be economically driven rather than anything humanitarian.
Right. Okay. What does this all mean, do you think, for the midterms?
I think that people do vote with their pocketbooks. I think going into the midterms, it will be a consideration. Certainly helps with the movement of the left that has been very anti-Israel. So that's going to give some gas in the fuel as we head into the elections. We've just had recent primaries that show that we're going to see a pretty further left set of candidates coming up against Republicans than some had previously really thought about. And so I think that does depict somewhat of the American insight into how they feel their country is being handled. But look, it is historically precedented that going into the midterms of any presidency, you're going to see a reversal in Congress and kind of a backlash against that. And so, me, like several other of my colleagues, we don't think it's going to be particularly pretty for the Republicans this fall, but it may not be as bad as maybe previously predicted.